I remember the first sound. Wood knocking wood, a rhythm like a heart. Before there was a cathedral, there was a forest of scaffolds and the creak of ropes, the chant of men hauling stone. I was there, a mason's apprentice with lime in my hair and raw skin where the chisel rubbed my thumb, standing on the Isle de la Cite when Bishop Maurice de Sully said we would raise a house so high that Paris would learn to lift its eyes. We broke ground while the river still smelled of fish and tanneries, while the old church of Saint-Étienne was being swallowed by plans drawn in chalk and prayer. The spring light shone on the piles of Luteon limestone newly cut from the quarries under the city, stone that had slept beneath our feet since before Caesar, and the dust of it tasted faintly of shells. I was small enough to run messages along planks too narrow for a cart. My master would put a block in my hands and say, "Feel it. Let your arms learn its weight before your mind does, because the stone's patience is longer than ours." We mixed mortar in troughs with shovels that sang against the sides, lime biting our wrists, sand rasping our palms. Men marked blocks with signs like little blessings, each guild and crew with its own crossed lines or crooked fish, so a wall could be read like a ledger, each course an entry in who had given their strength that day. Under us they dug the crypt, set the first piers. Above us the sky was a sheet of brightness that made you blink. People think cathedrals are built of prayer. They are also built of rope burns and bruised shins. We hauled with treadwheel cranes, great wooden cages where two men walked like patient animals to lift a stone that would have crushed 10 of us on the ground. The wheel groaned and the rope sang and the hook rose slowly, a shining tooth in the sun, and somewhere a foreman's voice found a pitch we all obeyed without thinking. Keep her steady, keep her true. Oak scaffolds bristled like a second city along the rising walls. Children stopped on the bridge to stare. Merchants paused with their carts under the shadow of what would be a nave. The island changed around us. The river's light caught in the new ashlar until it looked as if daylight itself had been quarried and stacked. I learned to read stone by sound. Tap it and a healthy block rings clear. Tap it again and you can hear if a fault is waiting like a hidden winter within. I learned the curve of an arch on my tongue, how to set the centering, lay the ribs, fill the webbing, wedge and wedge until the keystone slid into its bed like a secret being kept. When we struck the centering and the arch held its breath and did not fall, the men let out a laugh that was not laughter so much as relief turned into sound. We built porch by porch, bay by bay, our lives measured not in years but in courses of stone. Today to the springing, next Lent to the clear story, God willing a transept before my hair is gray. Paris watched and helped. Women carried water and bread to the works. Bargemen pulled rafts of timber and lead and glass upriver. Beggars napped against the warm blocks and woke with outlines of dust on their faces like masks. The king himself rode by once, and we stood still with our tools in our hands while he looked up and said nothing and then rode on, and that was all the blessing we needed. On holy days the bishop came and prayed aloud for our safety, and the wind snatched his Latin and laid it like lace on the river where it could cool. Inside the half-born walls the light became a different creature. Even before the windows the air felt taller. We set the round drums that would one day carry roses of glass, and I remember the first time the glazier unwrapped his colors. Blues as deep as evening beyond the city, reds with a warmth like coals, greens that made you think of orchards after rain. He painted saints and prophets with hair-thin lines of lead, fired them until the pigment fused to the glass like certainty, and then we lifted those flowers into stone frames and the sun poured through and broke on the floor into pieces that mothers could catch with their hands and lay on their children's faces like blessings. When the western rose lit for the first time, even the foremen took off their caps. The nave became water and the light a tide. We built outward as well as upward. The walls wanted to spread like men at the end of a feast, so we taught them discipline with flying buttresses. Stone arms that grew from the outer aisles rose in a single sweep and pressed the thrust back into the ground. People in the streets argued about them. Some said it was witchcraft to make stone fly, but they saved the nave, those wings shouldering wind and bell and storm. Later, when a gale with fists like a giant's hit the island, you could hear the whole skeleton of the church hum with the force and return to quiet without complaint. Not everything went forward. Once a pier settled wrong and the crack ran like lightning up a new course. We stopped the day's work and listened to the wall the way you listen to a feverish child breathe. We unlaid what pride wanted to leave, rebuilt slower, and the second time the stones made their peace with one another. Another summer, heat pulled the sap from the great oak beams we had set for the roof, and the carpenter blessed them with salt and smoke and a prayer to every saint with a ladder in his story. One night the river rose and licked the foundations. Men stood with torches all along the quay, their flames little moons trembling in the wind. The next morning we built a higher step and kept going. I remember the day the choir first spoke. We had set enough vaults that sound climbed and came back. A boy with a voice like a reed pipe sang a single line, and the stone took it and returned it as if the building itself had learned the tune. After that the works sang more often. Psalms in spare hours, little songs to time our hauling, even jokes that bounced off the ribs and returned better than they went out. The cathedral was teaching us its voice, and we were learning to be quiet inside it. There were small marvels no one will put in a book. A mason's mark shaped like a star tucked at the base of a pier where only the mice will see it. A coin pressed into wet mortar by a superstitious ant. A hair from a saint's relic, dropped, retrieved, kissed, and set beneath a stone like a heartbeat. The smell of hot lead as the roofers poured sheets that skinned the whole house against the weather. A sparrow who nested in the crook of a capital carved with vines so delicate the leaves almost moved when the wind found them. We made monsters for the gutters, grim mouths to throw rain away from new limestone, and men laughed to see my first one, which looked more like a cat with a bad temper than a dragon. The foreman kept it anyway. Rain will not know the difference, he said, and the rain did not. I grew taller as the walls grew high. My master's hands grew spotted, his knuckles like knots in oak. He taught me to read the sun on stone, to know when winter light lies and makes lengths look shorter than they are, to trust the plumb more than the eye when fatigue arrives. He told me that a cathedral is not one building but many, the bishops in his vision, the kings in his pride, the masons in his measure, the peoples in their need. God gets them all, he added, and we get the joy of making ours as true as we can. I had been on the wheel so many times that the boards knew my feet. One afternoon, clouds low as thought, we lifted a ribstone for the nave vault, the wind sneaking in the doorways to tug at our clothes. The rope sang, the hook rose, the stone swayed once and steadied. Above, men on the centering reached with gloved hands and drew it in the last hand's breadth. When it settled, a silence fell as perfectly as a lid. Then the foreman tapped the wood, the wedges held, and a cheer went up that must have startled the saints in their colored windows. I leaned my forehead against the wheel and laughed, breathless and grateful in a language no one heard. Years later, when the towers had learned their shapes and bells were hoisted, bronze mouths that would teach the city the hours, I walked across the square and laid my palm on the stone near the west portal where 1,000 hands had already polished it to silk. The statues above the doors told their crowded stories. Kings, prophets, the last trumpet, virtues and vices stepping carefully past one another on the lintel. I searched the jams for a small cat with a bad temper and found him, forever spitting rain. People will say we built Notre-Dame for heaven. Perhaps. We also built it for Paris, for the bargemen who like a landmark as they nose their loads by the island, for the child who will look up and understand that beauty can be taller than fear, for the baker who will hear the bell at dawn and forgive the night. We built it for the dead, to carry their names from the whispering crypt into songs that climb, and for those not yet born, who will never know our faces but will feel our hands in the cool of the nave when summer is cruel. We built it so that time would have to slow down and step carefully for once. Sometimes, when the river wind turns and brings a smell of lime even years after the mortar has hardened, I remember my first day, when the island was mostly air and plan, and a bishop said we would raise a house that taught the city to look up. We did. The house looks back. And if you stand inside on a winter noon and a cloud pulls the light thin, you will hear it breathe. The same slow breathing we listened for in scaffolds and stone. The quiet labor of faith and hands. What we made is taller than we were, but it learned its height from our shoulders.